We typically assume the story of a chronic illness begins the day the first symptom appears. You feel sick, you go to the doctor, and together you scour your recent history for whatever lifestyle change or sudden stressor finally made your body break. That was the approach Dr. Bruce Kaplan took when he was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis in 1987. At 31 years old, he began an investigation into his own medical history that would span 4.5 decades. He meticulously cataloged the adult exposures that formed his perfect storm: the Epstein Barr virus, chronic stress from dental school, and heavy metal exposure from a mouthful of amalgam fillings. But mapping out those final triggers exposed a flaw in how we think about chronic disease. Identifying the exact weight that finally tipped your immune system over the edge doesn't explain how much burden that system was carrying to begin with. If chronic illness is an overflow of accumulated stressors, how far back in time do you have to look to find the very first drop? Understanding a complex diagnosis means abandoning the search for a single recent culprit. You have to rewind the tape and reverse engineer an entire lifetime of hidden accumulation. For Dr. Kaplan, rewinding that tape meant first looking at his early adulthood. Dental school introduced severe and prolonged academic stress into his daily life. It also required a mandatory hepatitis B vaccine for clinical work. He took it without question, but it acted as a massive, sudden immune activation event. This illustrates an immune system operating near its breaking point. When a sudden activation event drops onto a system under extreme tension, the structure snaps. Look underneath that final weight. It was already burdened by pre-existing stressors long before the vaccine. Stepping back into his adolescence reveals what those earlier weights were. Poor nutrition and a severe sugar addiction were already depleting his physical reserves. During these teenage years, he received his first mercury amalgam dental fillings, setting off a continuous, low-level release of heavy metals into his bloodstream. Yet, even these adolescent exposures were late additions to the ledger. His reservoir was already partially full before his teenage years even began. To find the true bottom of the reservoir, you have to cross the threshold of birth and look at the ledger inherited from his mother. She was carrying her own heavy biological burden. She had amalgam fillings, severe TMJ degeneration, and chronic health struggles, including obesity and diabetes. Because maternal blood supplies the developing fetus, those burdens are biologically shared. Mercury crosses the placenta, meaning that Dr. Kaplan was accumulating heavy metals before his brain was fully formed. His mother's Rh-negative immune system treated his Rh-positive blood as a threat. Latch maternal antibodies cross the placental barrier to attack fetal red blood cells. This is hemolytic disease of the newborn, a mother's immune system identifying her baby as an invader. The clinical aftermath was severe. To survive this acute autoimmune battlefield, the infant Dr. Kaplan required 2 complete blood transfusions immediately after birth. Before he had taken a single independent breath, his body had already endured one of the most intense immune activation events a human can experience. To be clear about the science of individual causation, that day zero crisis did not directly cause an MS diagnosis 31 years later, but it did act as a primer. Surviving a massive autoimmune event on your first day of life establishes a new baseline for the immune system, one that reduces its total capacity to process the environmental and physical stressors that will inevitably follow. This infographic shows a better way to visualize chronic illness: the health bucket. No human arrives in the world with a completely empty reservoir. As you can see, the bottom quarter is already filled before life outside the womb even begins. Every child is born carrying the biological conversations, the trace chemical exposures, and the physical traumas passed from mother to baby through the placenta. Dr. Kaplan believes this perspective applies far beyond his own case. If we view the body as an accumulating reservoir, then the perfect storm never starts on the day you were diagnosed, or even the year your symptoms appeared. If you are investigating your own health history, look past the obvious adult triggers. Ask your living parents what their health was like before you were born. Hunt down your earliest neonatal medical records. You may find that your bucket was never empty, and knowing exactly when that accumulation started is the mandatory first step to understanding the illness you are fighting today.